She was alone, in labor, humiliated. Her husband threw coffee at her, declaring, "This baby isn't mine." But what he didn't know was that her life was about to change forever. Betrayal, heartbreak, and despair. Meet the woman who rises from ashes, fights back, and claims a love and life no one could take from her. This is her journey from humiliation to unstoppable triumph. And it starts now. Welcome back to Beyond Color Stories. I'm so glad to have you here today. Tell me, where are you listening to me from? Drop it in the comments below. I'd love to know. Before we dive in, make sure you watch till the very end. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our family. Now, let's dive into today's story. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled Lila's nostrils, clinging to her senses like a cruel reminder of the reality she had been thrust into. Every contraction twisted through her body like iron bands, relentless and merciless, each surge of pain a reminder that she was utterly, painfully vulnerable. She gritted her teeth, her knuckles white as she clutched her belly, feeling the tiny, fragile life inside her kick against the confines of her womb, as if it too could sense the storm raging outside. Sweat beaded on her forehead, matting her hair against her temples, and she let out a strangled moan, calling desperately for Mark. "Please, Mark, now!" Her voice cracked, raw and broken, each word a plea for the warmth and protection she had hoped to find in her husband. But the door swung open slowly, and in his place stepped a figure colder than the winter night, his eyes devoid of the slightest spark of compassion. Mark's gaze fell upon her like a blade, cutting deeper than the labor pains that racked her body. He didn't rush forward, didn't reach for her trembling hand, didn't even seem to notice the fear and anguish radiating from her every fiber. Instead, he sneered, a cruel twist of lips that made her stomach drop further. "This baby isn't mine." His voice thundered through the otherwise quiet labor room, echoing off the sterile walls like a sentence passed down from some merciless judge. "And you're nothing but a poor, weak woman." Each word slammed into her chest like a hammer, and for a moment, the air itself seemed to shatter. The nurses froze, their expressions flickering between shock and helplessness, as if time had slowed, leaving Lila suspended in her humiliation, exposed and defenseless. Without warning, Mark's hand shot out, flinging a cup of coffee across the room with a precision that betrayed his anger. The dark liquid arced through the air, spilling dangerously close to her trembling body, hot droplets sizzling against the edge of the hospital gown she wore. The scent of burnt coffee mingled with antiseptic and fear, a chaotic swirl that made her stomach churn almost as violently as the labor itself. "You're divorced," he spat, his voice venomous, final, as if those two words could erase every moment of joy, every memory of their life together, and reduce her existence to ashes. Lila's breath hitched, tears pooling in her eyes as the sound of the cup shattering against the floor seemed to echo the breaking of her own spirit. Her knees buckled, though the nurses rushed to steady her, their faces pale, uncertain whether to comfort her or confront him. But Mark was already turning, striding toward the door with deliberate arrogance, his heels clicking on the linoleum floor like the countdown of some cruel clock, leaving her alone with her pain, her terror, and the newborn life crying its first fragile wails. Lila's vision blurred, tears streaking across her cheeks as she leaned down to cradle the tiny bundle in her arms. The boy's cries were piercing, yet beneath them she felt a strange, fragile thread of connection, the only warmth in the icy landscape Mark had left behind. "We'll survive. Somehow," she whispered into the soft down of his hair, though her voice trembled with fear and exhaustion. Could she truly protect him from the coldness of a father who had just abandoned them before their first breath together? Then, a faint vibration buzzed against her side, drawing her attention to her phone, lying forgotten on the small counter. She wiped her tears hastily, her fingers trembling as she read the single message lighting up the screen. "I'm here. Whatever you need." It was from Ethan, her childhood friend, the one person who had always stood quietly beside her through every hardship, every silent heartbreak. Lila's heart skipped a beat, a cautious hope stirring in the ruins of her despair. Could he really be here now at the exact moment she needed him most? Her lips parted in a whispered prayer, an almost imperceptible plea. "Please, don't let me be alone." The seconds stretched into eternities as she rocked her baby gently, each movement measured and careful, mindful of the fragile life she now carried in her arms. Every sob of pain, every shudder of exhaustion was matched by the trembling of her own heart, a fragile, fragile beat that dared to hope that this night of humiliation might yet hold a sliver of redemption. The walls of the room seemed to close in, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on her sweat-slicked face, on the shattered cup lying in a dark puddle at her feet. She dared not move too fast for fear of toppling the delicate balance of survival she clung to, even as the echo of Mark's betrayal seemed to reverberate in every corner. And yet, even in the suffocating weight of despair, a fire ignited in Lila, a flicker of defiance born from humiliation, pain, and the stubborn insistence of life itself. This was her child, her blood, her strength, and she would not allow a single cruel word, a single act of contempt to extinguish it. Every contraction became a battle she was determined to win, every heartbeat a declaration that she was not broken, not defeated. Could she truly rise from this moment, this fiery crucible of cruelty and betrayal, into something greater than she had ever imagined? Her fingers dug into the folds of the hospital blanket, knuckles white as she whispered again, "We'll survive. We'll rise." The wails of her newborn mingled with her ragged breaths, creating a chaotic symphony of pain, fear, and raw, unfiltered life. Her mind teetered between exhaustion and clarity, fear and determination, wondering if the world would ever treat her gently again. Outside the room, the distant footsteps of hospital staff and the muffled voices of visitors created a sense of isolation that pressed against her like a physical force. And yet, amidst the chaos, the vibration of her phone, Ethan's promise, remained a lifeline, a tether to the possibility that kindness and support still existed, waiting just beyond the storm Mark had brought into her life. She clutched her son closer, feeling the warmth of his tiny body seep into her own, and a quiet, resolute thought took root. This night, this moment of horror and humiliation, would not define her. She would not allow despair to claim her, no matter how dark the path ahead seemed. Somewhere, in the shadows of fear and betrayal, a spark had ignited, a spark that would grow, fueled by pain, love, and the unyielding will to reclaim every fragment of her life. Could she survive Mark's cruelty? Could she transform this shame into a strength that no one, not even he, could ever take away? Only time would tell, and in that suspended electric moment, Lila made a silent vow. She would rise. 2. The city lights blurred through the car window as Lila clutched her newborn son close, the weight of his fragile body pressing against her chest in a way that both anchored her and reminded her of the vulnerability she now carried. Every step she took toward the exit of the hospital felt like wading through invisible quicksand, each footfall heavier than the last, her body screaming from exhaustion, her mind burdened with grief and humiliation. The echoes of Mark's cruel words haunted her, still reverberating through her mind. "This baby isn't mine. You're nothing but a poor, weak woman." Each syllable felt like 1,000 tiny knives, cutting through the tender remnants of her dignity. And yet, somewhere beneath the suffocating despair, a quiet ember of determination flickered, a stubborn whisper telling her that she was more than the cruelty inflicted upon her. The automatic doors slid open, and there, waiting beneath the cold glare of the streetlights, was Ethan. He held a bag of groceries in one hand, and in his eyes Lila saw no judgment, no pity, only steadfast support. His smile, calm and unwavering, reached her like a balm to her wounded soul. She had always known he was reliable, a constant in the unpredictable tides of her life, but tonight, in this moment of fragility, his presence felt like an anchor in a world that had turned against her. The sound of her own ragged breathing mingled with the distant hum of traffic, and she realized, almost with disbelief, that she was not completely alone. Perhaps she had never truly needed Mark's approval or presence to define her worth. Perhaps she was capable of standing on her own, even with a newborn in her arms. Every step away from the hospital felt simultaneously like liberation and terror. The city was alive around her, indifferent to her struggle, yet she felt it pressing in, a silent audience to her quiet, desperate journey. Ethan's hand brushed briefly against hers as he helped her with the grocery bags, and the warmth of his touch ignited a fragile sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. It was in these small gestures, a nod of encouragement, a steadying hand, a quiet smile, that she began to feel the first stirrings of her own strength. Perhaps survival wasn't about heroics or grand gestures. Perhaps it was about quietly reclaiming her life, stitch by stitch, breath by breath. The apartment door creaked open, revealing a tiny, dimly lit space that smelled faintly of paint, fabric, and the faint tang of baby powder. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, a haven from the chaos that had dominated the last months of her life. She placed her son gently on the small couch, tucking a soft blanket around him, and he stirred, blinking his wide, curious eyes at her. A fragile smile lifted her lips despite the exhaustion, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life that wasn't consumed by grief or humiliation. Her fingers brushed over the sketches scattered across the small dining table, remnants of her previous work, long ignored and dismissed. Yet now they felt like lifelines, a tangible reminder that she had a skill, a gift that could not be stripped away by Mark's cruelty or by anyone else's indifference. Night fell, heavy and unyielding, and while the city beyond her window buzzed with indifferent life, Lila worked. Sleepless nights became work nights, and the soft hum of her sewing machine joined the symphony of her determination. Fabrics draped across chairs, sketches pinned to the walls, each line and stitch a declaration. She would not be broken. Every rejection letter that arrived, each polite decline from boutiques or clients, only fueled her resolve. The sting of failure was sharper than any physical pain she had endured, but in that pain she discovered a strange, intoxicating clarity. She was capable of more than survival. She could rise, she could conquer, she could turn humiliation into triumph. Ethan became her silent partner in this journey, not by dominating her life, but by quietly supporting it. He watched her carefully, aware of the fragile balance between exhaustion and obsession, and yet he never pushed, never demanded more than she was willing to give. He held the baby when her arms ached, brewed her tea when she forgot to eat, and offered advice only when she sought it, each action a thread, weaving their lives closer together. The bond they shared was subtle but powerful, built not on grand declarations, but on the quiet, unshakable foundation of trust. With him by her side, Lila began to realize that the world, despite its cruelty, contained pockets of kindness that could sustain her through even the darkest nights. Her son's soft breaths as he slept beside her were a constant reminder of what she was fighting for. In his innocence, she found motivation, a reason to endure, to persist, to transform every sleepless night into an opportunity to build something better. She imagined the life she could give him, one where he never felt the sting of humiliation or the cold indifference she had endured. And though the path was uncertain, though poverty and hardship loomed like towering shadows, she clung to the idea that she could forge a life that was untainted by the cruelty of others. Each stitch in her designs, each careful brushstroke of her sketches became a protest against despair, a declaration that she would not be defined by Mark's betrayal. Yet even as hope began to root itself in her heart, the weight of reality pressed down like a relentless tide. Bills piled on the counter, reminders of the financial precariousness she faced. Her apartment, though a haven, was cramped and imperfect, a far cry from the life she had imagined. Every night as she tucked her son into the crib and watched him drift into sleep, a quiet, gnawing fear whispered in her mind. What if it's never enough? What if Mark's cruelty has left scars too deep to heal? Those thoughts threatened to unbalance her resolve, but each time she forced them aside, reminding herself that despair was not an option. Survival was, and beyond survival, there was possibility. Days and nights blurred into one another, a relentless rhythm of feeding, stitching, sketching, and dreaming. Ethan's presence was the constant melody amidst the chaos, a reassuring heartbeat that steadied her trembling resolve. There were moments when exhaustion brought tears to her eyes, when the weight of being both mother and provider felt insurmountable. But even then, she persevered. Every setback was met with renewed determination, every sleepless night softened by the tiny, joyful giggles of her son and the quiet, steadfast support of Ethan. Slowly, the once overwhelming loneliness began to dissipate, replaced by a burgeoning sense of self-worth and purpose. And yet, at the back of her mind, a question remained, a shadow that refused to fade. Could she truly turn her despair into triumph, or would the crushing weight of poverty and betrayal finally break her spirit? The uncertainty was a constant companion, a low hum beneath the clatter of the sewing machine and the soft breathing of her child. Each day was a delicate balance between hope and fear, determination and exhaustion. But Lila, forged in the fire of humiliation and pain, had begun to understand something essential. True strength was not the absence of fear, but the courage to move forward in spite of it. In those quiet moments, as the city slept beyond her windows and the soft glow of a single lamp illuminated her work, Lila felt a flicker of something she had not dared feel for years: possibility. She dared to imagine a future where her designs would no longer sit ignored, where her son would grow up surrounded by love and pride, and where the memory of Mark's cruelty would no longer hold power over her. Each night, as exhaustion tugged at her limbs, she whispered to herself, a vow more powerful than any declaration. I will rise. I will survive. I will build a life that no one can take away. Months passed like a tide, each day bringing with it the quiet rhythm of struggle, effort, and cautious hope. Lila had transformed her tiny apartment into a sanctuary of creativity, walls adorned with sketches, fabric samples draped over chairs, and the faint hum of the sewing machine marking the cadence of her life. Sleepless nights had become her companion, yet within the exhaustion she discovered a strange exhilaration. Every stitch she sewed, every pattern she cut, became a declaration of survival, a testimony to her resilience. The baby who once rested so fragilely in her arms had grown a little stronger, his laughter now a bright note weaving through the hours of toil, reminding her of the stakes, of the love that anchored her to life's purpose. Her first small successes arrived quietly, like whispers that barely disturbed the air but carried the weight of promise. Local boutiques began to notice her designs, intrigued by the originality, the precision, and the heart that pulsed in every seam. Orders trickled in, modest at first, but each carried more than mere profit. They were validation, a balm for pride that had been wounded by years of dismissal, humiliation, and betrayal. Lila cherished each note from clients, every compliment, savoring them in secret moments as though the words themselves could patch the invisible scars Mark had left on her soul. And through it all, Ethan remained a steady, unwavering presence. He never imposed himself, never demanded acknowledgement, but quietly helped with her son, guided her when doubt threatened to paralyze, and celebrated each small victory as if it were his own. Slowly, a deeper bond began to form between them, subtle and unspoken, yet rooted in trust, loyalty, and shared hardship. Childhood memories had provided a foundation, but it was the present struggles and victories that cemented their connection. Lila began to feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope that life could be gentle, hope that she could rise above the shadows of humiliation, hope that love could exist in a world that had for so long been cruel. And yet, beneath the glimmer of optimism, a shadow lingered: the memory of Mark, his cruel words, and the coffee that had become a symbol of her degradation. Could she truly move forward, or would the echo of betrayal continue to haunt every step? Business grew incrementally, then exponentially. International clients began to take notice, drawn by the unique elegance and emotion woven into her designs. Each new order brought excitement, yes, but also the gnawing fear of inadequacy, that perhaps she was not worthy, that she might fail, or worse, that someone from her past would attempt to tarnish her newfound progress. Yet with every challenge, Lila discovered a reservoir of strength she had never tapped before. The hum of her sewing machine became a heartbeat of possibility, each completed garment a small victory, each satisfied client a step closer to reclaiming a life that had once been stolen from her by cruelty and abandonment. Ethan's presence was a quiet constant, grounding her through the whirlwind of rising expectations. He was there when deliveries arrived, when sleepless nights threatened to overwhelm, when her hands ached from meticulous work, and when her mind teetered on the edge of self-doubt. He never took control, never overshadowed her, yet his encouragement carried the weight of unspoken devotion. Slowly, Lila found herself leaning on him, not just out of necessity but from choice, appreciating the warmth and reliability he provided. Each gesture, each word, each small act of kindness reminded her that not all men were like Mark, and that she was deserving of respect, care, and love. And then, just as the momentum of her burgeoning career reached a thrilling peak, the past came creeping in like an unexpected shadow. A notification blinked on her phone. A name she had worked to erase from her life, a presence she had tried to bury beneath layers of triumph and resilience. Mark. Her heart skipped, a pang of fear and anger twisting together in her chest. He wanted to see her. The message was brief, almost clinical, devoid of explanation, yet heavy with implications. Could he truly believe he had a place in the life she was painstakingly building? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, mingling with the adrenaline of her daily grind, threatening to destabilize the careful equilibrium she had fought to achieve. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind racing between memories and possibilities. What did he want? An apology? A reconciliation? Or was it simply to observe, to measure how far she had fallen or risen? Every scenario played out vividly, each more unsettling than the last, while her son slept peacefully, oblivious to the storm of emotions swirling in the room around him. Lila's fingers trembled as she continued to sketch, as though by burying herself in her designs, she could regain control over the uncontrollable. Yet, even as the pencil traced lines across the page, her heart pounded with uncertainty. The past had returned, unbidden and unwelcome, threatening to intrude upon her present, to test the strength she had fought so hard to cultivate. The following days blurred into a tense rhythm, punctuated by client calls, fabric shipments, and the relentless demands of running her small but growing business. Yet with each completed task, each satisfied customer, she reminded herself that she was no longer the woman who had been humiliated in a hospital labor room, alone and abandoned. The anger that had once threatened to consume her now transformed into fuel, propelling her forward, sharpening her focus, and reinforcing her determination to succeed. Every stitch became a silent victory over Mark, a declaration that his cruelty could no longer define her life. And still, the shadow of that message lingered, a quiet pulse of tension at the edges of her mind. She couldn't ignore it. She couldn't pretend it didn't exist. Each day she went about her work. Each night she cradled her son in her arms. That single word, Mark, hovered like a storm cloud, a constant reminder that the past might yet intrude upon her carefully constructed present. Could she face him with the composure she had cultivated? Could she protect the fragile new life she was building, both in her career and in her heart? The questions gnawed at her, each one a mini cliffhanger that left her restless, determined, and wary. Finally, the day arrived when her first major international client confirmed a lucrative contract, an opportunity that would elevate her career beyond anything she had dared to imagine. The excitement should have been pure, untainted by past shadows, yet Lila felt the tension of Mark's impending presence pressing against the joy like a heavy curtain. Each congratulatory message, each expression of approval from her growing clientele, was tinged with the uneasy awareness that the man who had once sought to destroy her confidence was now reaching across the void, demanding attention she had no desire to give. She clenched her fists around the phone, her thumb hovering over the screen as she contemplated her response, a single word weighing heavier than the entire world. What does he want from me now? As she stared at the message, her son resting peacefully beside her, the tiny rise and fall of his chest grounding her in the present, Lila realized something profound. She had changed. She was no longer the frightened, humiliated woman of the hospital labor room, no longer defined by Mark's cruelty. Yet the encounter that awaited, the meeting that he demanded, promised to test her, to force her to confront the past she had struggled so hard to rise above. Every muscle in her body tensed with anticipation, her mind whirling with possible outcomes, her heart beating like a war drum against her ribs. Could she meet him with calm authority, or would the ghost of humiliation threaten to unravel the fragile confidence she had fought so hard to build? And in that suspended moment, as light filtered through the small apartment window, casting long, anxious shadows across her workspace, Lila made a silent, powerful vow. Whatever Mark sought, whatever intentions he carried, she would face him, not as the woman he had scorned, but as the mother, designer, and resilient force she had become. The storm of the past might rage, but she had discovered the unshakable core within herself, a strength that no cruelty could diminish. Could she turn this encounter into another victory, or would it reignite wounds she had worked so hard to heal? The question lingered, unanswered, as the scene closed on a woman poised at the precipice of her greatest test yet. The notification on Lila's phone had come like a bolt of lightning, sudden, jarring, and impossible to ignore. Mark's name stared at her from the screen, bold and accusing, a reminder that the past had not yet released its grip. Her heart thudded violently in her chest, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and lingering anger, threatening to unravel her carefully constructed calm. But she had survived worse, far worse, and she refused to be intimidated again. She stared at the message for a long, tense moment, her fingers trembling slightly, as if the act of touching the screen could somehow reignite the pain he had caused her. Then, with a steady breath that she forced from the depths of her will, she put the phone aside and returned her gaze to her designs. The fabric spread across the table, the sketches pinned meticulously to the walls, and the hum of her sewing machine became her anchor, a heartbeat of defiance against the shadow Mark had cast. Every stitch she sewed was a rebellion, a quiet but fierce protest against humiliation, against cruelty, and against the years she had been made to feel powerless. The designs were no longer just garments, they were statements, bold, uncompromising, alive with the strength she had cultivated in the crucible of hardship. Ethan watched her from across the room, a quiet presence in the chaos of fabric and thread, and he noticed the fire in her eyes. It was the spark of someone who had endured, someone who had clawed herself back from despair and humiliation, and someone who would never again allow her self-worth to be determined by another. Silently, deeply, Ethan fell further in love, not with beauty or charm alone, but with the raw resilience that radiated from every line she drew, every fold she crafted, every careful stitch she pulled tight against the canvas of possibility. Her son, oblivious to the storm of adult worries around him, giggled softly as he reached toward her, a tiny hand brushing against her sketchpad, as if offering his own kind of approval. For the first time, Lila felt a joy untainted by Mark's cruelty, pure, simple, and intoxicating. It was in these moments, balancing motherhood and the rebirth of her professional identity, that she realized the depth of her own power. She had endured betrayal, humiliation, and abandonment, yet here she was, creating life and beauty simultaneously, nurturing both her son and her dreams with unwavering attention. Every passing hour, every sleepless night, every pang of doubt and exhaustion only reinforced the knowledge that she was no longer defined by the past. She was defined by the choices she made in the present. Then came the news that would transform her life in ways she had only dared to dream of. Her work had caught the attention of an international design competition, a stage reserved for visionaries, for those whose creations could command attention and admiration on a global scale. The very thought sent her pulse racing and her hands shaking as she meticulously prepared her submission, pouring into it every ounce of creativity, emotion, and resilience she had cultivated over months of relentless work. She labored day and night, sometimes forgetting to eat, sometimes skipping sleep, driven by the conviction that her talent, her skill, her voice could not be ignored any longer. This was not just a competition, it was her declaration, her ultimate proof that she could rise from humiliation and claim the recognition she deserved. Yet alongside the exhilaration lurked the gnawing anxiety, a shadow that refused to be silenced. What if it wasn't enough? What if her designs were dismissed, criticized, or overlooked? Each sleepless night, her mind replayed the humiliation she had endured at Mark's hands, the cruel words and the coffee that had splashed dangerously close, and the fear that history might repeat itself threatened to sabotage her confidence. Could she truly rise above it all, or would the echoes of past humiliation claw their way back into her life, undermining the courage she had fought so hard to build? She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and whispered to herself, a vow carried on the trembling edge of hope, I am stronger than fear. I am stronger than him. I am unstoppable. Ethan remained by her side through every agonizing hour of preparation, offering quiet support without judgment. He brewed tea when her hands were too raw to continue, soothed her son when fatigue threatened to overwhelm, and reminded her softly but insistently that she was capable of more than she realized. His presence was a lifeline, a constant reassurance that she did not have to face the storm alone. And though she appreciated him deeply, the work remained hers, every stitch, every sketch, every carefully chosen fabric a testament to her individuality, her courage, and her defiance against the forces that had once sought to diminish her. As the day of submission drew near, tension coiled inside her like a living thing. Each moment spent finalizing her designs was weighted with the possibility of triumph or failure. Each brushstroke and seam a heartbeat of suspense. She imagined the panel of judges examining her work, scrutinizing every detail, questioning every line. and the very thought made her pulse spike with anticipation and fear. Could she stand before the world and prove that the humiliation of the past could not touch her present? Could she, in the face of self-doubt and exhaustion, demonstrate a mastery and creativity that would silence even her own inner critic? The night before the results were to be announced, Lila sat in the dim glow of her small studio, her son sleeping soundly in the next room, Ethan's reassuring presence a steady hum behind her. She traced her fingers over the fabric, eyes closed, imagining her designs displayed on the global stage, admired for their ingenuity and beauty. Yet the tension was unbearable, a silent drumbeat echoing through her chest. What if the world did not recognize her worth? What if, after all she had endured, she was still overlooked? The questions gnawed at her resolve, threatening to weaken the foundation she had fought so hard to build. And then, a spark of realization lit her mind. Success was not merely about recognition from others. Success was the proof she carried in every fiber of her being, in the strength that had grown from humiliation, in the love she nurtured for her son, and in the resilience she displayed day after day. She realized that whether the judges applauded her or not, she had already won in the most important ways. She had survived, endured, and created. Yet the competitive streak in her refused to settle, refusing to let her rest until the final verdict came. Could she achieve the validation she so desperately craved, or would lingering doubts and the shadows of Mark's betrayal seek to claim her once more? The first signs of the announcement arrived subtly, a notification that blinked on her phone like a candle in the dark. Her fingers trembled as she hovered over the message, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Every second felt like an eternity as she imagined the life-changing possibilities that hung on a single notification. Could she finally step fully into the light, claim the triumph she had fought so tirelessly for, and silence the ghosts of humiliation that lingered in the corners of her mind? Or would self-doubt, fear, and exhaustion sabotage her moment, leaving her once again at the mercy of the past? As she sat there, pencil in hand, fabric in her lap, the hum of the sewing machine still resonating through the quiet room, Lila understood that she had already become a force to be reckoned with. No message, no person, no memory of cruelty could diminish the strength that had been forged in the fires of her pain. She drew a deep, steadying breath, feeling the determination thrum through her veins, the anticipation of possibility coiling like electricity in her chest. The results were imminent, and with them, the world would either acknowledge her brilliance or challenge her resolve. Either way, she would stand unbroken, a testament to the power of survival, resilience, and the untamed courage of a woman who refused to be defeated. The morning air felt electric, charged with anticipation, as Lila stood behind the grand curtains of the award hall, her hands tightly clutching her son's small fingers. The soft fabric of her gown shimmered under the gentle glow of the backstage lights, yet it could not compete with the fire that burned in her chest. Months of sleepless nights, relentless work, humiliation endured, and dreams fought for had led her to this precise moment. Every stitch, every sketch, every painstaking decision she had made now culminated in a single point of culmination, a moment she had imagined endlessly in the quiet of her tiny apartment as the city slept outside. Her pulse thrummed like a war drum, echoing the heartbeat of the little life she held close, and yet beneath the tension, a strange serenity settled over her. She had arrived, not because of anyone's approval, not because of luck, but because of the power she had carved from resilience and determination. Ethan stood quietly a few feet behind her, his eyes fixed on her with a pride that seemed almost visible, radiating warmth and admiration. His presence was a grounding force amidst the cacophony of nerves that threatened to pull her under. He didn't need to speak. She could feel his support in every steadying glance, in the reassuring brush of his hand as he adjusted the strap of her son's little jacket. They had both been through storms, storms of poverty, humiliation and betrayal. And now, in this fleeting instant before the lights shone on her, their shared journey coalesced into an unspoken affirmation. She was unstoppable, and he was honored to witness her ascend. The roar of the crowd beyond the curtains was deafening, even before she stepped onto the stage, a living, breathing entity that pressed upon her senses with awe and intimidation. Cameras flashed in rapid succession, capturing glimpses of her through the small slit in the curtains, while reporters and spectators murmured and whispered about the brilliance of the designer whose work had captivated the world. She drew a deep, shuddering breath, holding her son a little closer, feeling the tiny warmth of his body against hers as though he too could sense the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Her mind raced, replaying the humiliations of her past, the cruel coffee thrown in the hospital, Mark's heartless words, all of it threatening to surface, to taint this long-awaited moment of triumph. Could she rise above it all, or would his shadow darken the brilliance she had worked so hard to create? When her name was finally announced, the world seemed to tilt, the applause swelling like a wave that threatened to sweep her away. Lila's legs trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming intensity of realization. She was here, she had arrived, and she was being celebrated on her own terms. She stepped onto the stage, holding her son's hand tightly, the cameras flashing relentlessly, the applause roaring like a living entity around her. Every face in the audience blurred into a sea of admiration, yet none of it mattered as much as the sense of personal victory coursing through her veins. This was hers, her achievement, her triumph, forged from pain, perseverance, and relentless creativity. The judges handed her the gleaming trophy, a symbol not just of recognition, but of vindication, and for a moment she felt the weight of all the nights she had spent awake, the long hours of sewing and sketching, the tears shed in solitude, the relentless fear of failure, all of it condensed into this singular, radiant moment. She glanced down at her son, his eyes wide with curiosity and innocence, and felt a surge of emotion that left her breathless. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of sheer, unfiltered joy. Every humiliation, every insult, every moment of self-doubt had led her here, and now, standing on the grand stage of global recognition, she allowed herself to feel the full magnitude of her success. And yet, the past lingered, lurking at the edges of her triumph. Mark, watching from a distant balcony, could scarcely comprehend the transformation before him. The woman he had humiliated, the woman he had dismissed, now shone with a brilliance that was entirely beyond his control or influence. A pang of regret pierced him, sharper and more painful than any wound he had ever inflicted, as he realized, perhaps too late, that he had lost forever the only woman whose spirit and power he had underestimated. Could he ever attempt to undo the damage, or had his cruelty permanently sealed the gap between them? His gaze lingered, helpless and full of remorse, as he watched the very embodiment of resilience and success unfold before him, untouchable, radiant, and entirely hers. The audience continued to roar, their applause a tidal wave that threatened to drown out her own racing thoughts. Yet Lila clutched the award tightly, grounding herself in the physical weight of her accomplishment. Ethan's hand brushed against hers from behind, a silent reassurance that they were not just witnesses to this moment, but participants in a shared journey that had transformed their lives. The pride in his eyes mirrored the quiet, steadfast love that had carried her through months of uncertainty, sleepless nights, and ceaseless effort. She allowed herself a brief, indulgent smile, feeling the warmth of his presence and the intoxicating affirmation that she had truly earned this, not through luck or chance, but through the unyielding force of her own determination. The cameras continued to flash, each burst of light a reminder of the global stage upon which she now stood. Yet in her heart, she felt a quiet, unassailable victory. The whispers of humiliation, the sting of betrayal, the shadow of Mark's cruelty, all of it had transformed into fuel, propelling her into a life she had fought tirelessly to claim. She allowed her gaze to sweep across the audience, noticing not just the accolades, but the expressions of genuine admiration, the quiet nods of respect, the awe in the eyes of those who had once dismissed her work. It was a moment of validation unlike any she had ever experienced, a public acknowledgement that she was indeed extraordinary. Even as the applause continued, Lila's mind remained alert, aware that the journey was far from over. Success could be fleeting, recognition ephemeral, and challenges would continue to arise, demanding the same resilience and determination that had brought her this far. But in this fleeting moment, she permitted herself to savor the sweetness of triumph, to feel the pulse of victory coursing through her veins, and to embrace the profound satisfaction of having risen above every obstacle and every shadow cast upon her. Mark's regret lingered in the distant balcony, a silent, impotent presence that could no longer diminish her joy. Lila's heart swelled, not with anger, but with the quiet strength of knowing that she had triumphed on her own terms. Each flash of the camera, each cheer from the crowd, each smile and nod of recognition reaffirmed the truth she had known all along. She was unstoppable, unbreakable, and fully capable of carving her destiny with her own hands. Could she maintain this victory in the face of lingering past shadows, or would echoes of old pain try to creep back into her triumph? The question hovered in the air like an unresolved chord. Yet for now, the stage, the applause, and the glow of achievement belonged wholly to her. As the ceremony drew to a close, Lila cradled her award, holding her son close, and allowed herself a moment of complete surrender to emotion. Tears streamed down her face, hot, unrelenting, and entirely of joy, a cleansing of years of pain, a release of humiliation, a quiet celebration of survival and success. Ethan's hand found hers again, their fingers interlacing, grounding her in the reality that this victory was shared, not in credit, but in the enduring support and love that had allowed her to flourish. The stage lights dimmed, the applause subsided, and in the lingering quiet, Lila realized something profound. She had reclaimed her life, her power, and her dignity, and nothing, not even the shadow of Mark's regret, could ever take it from her. The grand hall's echoes of applause had barely faded when Lila felt Ethan's hand brush hers. It was a fleeting contact at first, delicate and almost accidental, but it carried a warmth that spread like sunlight through her chest. She looked up at him, startled by the intensity of the feeling, and found his gaze steady, tender, and unwavering. In that moment, she realized that the bond between them had shifted imperceptibly but irrevocably. Friendship, once grounded in the shared hardships of childhood and the trials of her recent struggles, had begun to bloom into something deeper, something tender and protective. Her heart fluttered in a way that Mark's presence had never once stirred, and for the first time she allowed herself to wonder, could love, gentle and steadfast, truly find her again? Her son's laughter rang out, breaking through the swirl of celebration around them. Ethan instinctively scooped the little boy into his arms, holding him with a care that spoke of instinctive understanding and patient devotion. Lila watched, a swelling warmth in her chest as tears threatened to escape, not of sorrow, but of gratitude and recognition. She had found not just a partner in life, but a father figure for her son, a man whose strength was quiet, whose love was measured, and whose support never demanded reciprocation but was freely given. Every careful gesture, every subtle act of consideration became a thread weaving their lives together, forming a tapestry stronger than she had ever dared to imagine. The days that followed the ceremony were quiet, yet they were rich with subtle intimacy. They lingered in small moments, Ethan pouring coffee as she struggled through early mornings of work, Lila laughing at a small joke he made as the sun rose over the city skyline, their hands brushing as they walked through the familiar streets of their neighborhood. Each action, though simple, carried weight. Each smile, each shared glance was a quiet affirmation that they were building something rare and enduring. Lila, cautious but yearning, allowed herself to explore these emotions, to understand that love could exist beyond the bitterness of betrayal, that trust could be rebuilt slowly but surely, and that happiness could be real and attainable. Late nights became a sanctuary, a space where they could speak freely without judgment, where vulnerabilities were shared and secrets whispered. Lila recounted her childhood memories to him, the quiet pain of years spent proving herself, and the humiliations that had once seemed insurmountable. Ethan listened, not with pity, but with attentiveness and reverence, acknowledging her strength without undermining her vulnerability. In return, he shared pieces of his own life, his dreams and his fears, allowing Lila to see him not just as a friend or supporter, but as a man with depth, integrity, and unwavering devotion. Each revelation, each exchange, deepened the trust between them, cementing a bond that had started in hardship but was now flowering in tenderness. Their love was slow, deliberate, and patient. There were no hurried declarations, no grand gestures of ostentation, just the steady accumulation of shared moments that built intimacy and emotional safety. Lila noticed the way Ethan's eyes lingered on her when she thought he was distracted, the way his hand sought hers during quiet walks, the gentle encouragement he offered when self-doubt threatened to overwhelm her. In these subtle, consistent ways, he showed that love was not only passion, but also steadfast commitment, the kind that could heal wounds inflicted by years of betrayal and abandonment. She found herself leaning into him, allowing herself to feel protected, cherished, and seen in ways that Mark had never been capable of providing. Even her son seemed to sense the shift, his laughter becoming more frequent when Ethan was near, his small hands reaching out for the warmth of Ethan's embrace. Lila watched this dynamic with a mixture of awe and relief. The man she had once leaned on for support had become a cornerstone in her life, both as a partner and as a guide for the young boy who had survived so much already. Each interaction, each shared smile, was a subtle reminder that they were forming a family not defined by blood alone, but by love, commitment, and the courage to rebuild from the ashes of the past. Yet, as with all new love, uncertainty lingered beneath the surface. Lila often found herself questioning her own heart. Could she fully open herself to Ethan? Could she trust that this love would endure, that it would not falter under the pressures of life, the scars of past betrayals, or the unpredictability of fate? At times, shadows of Mark's cruelty flickered through her mind, stirring doubt and fear that she might be too vulnerable, too trusting. But each time she reminded herself of the life she was building now, a life defined by choice, resilience, and the authenticity of her bond with Ethan. They spent evenings walking under the soft glow of city lights, hand in hand, the rhythmic motion of their steps mirroring the quiet, steady growth of their feelings. Conversations meandered from dreams of future projects to light-hearted reflections on their day, punctuated by laughter that felt richer and more genuine than any joy she had known with Mark. Each touch, each smile, each unspoken understanding created a sense of continuity and safety, a reassurance that love, when nurtured patiently, could be a refuge rather than a storm. Could she trust herself to embrace this love fully, to surrender to it without fear, knowing that her heart had been broken before but was capable of healing now? In the quiet solitude of her apartment, After nights spent sharing dreams and planning for a future filled with hope, Lila often found herself reflecting on the transformation in her life. She remembered the labor room, the coffee hurled in scorn, the humiliation that had once threatened to define her existence, and contrasted it with the tender reality she now experienced. The juxtaposition was dizzying, yet profoundly satisfying, the pain of the past serving as a contrast to the richness of the present. It was proof that love could emerge even from ashes, that trust could be rebuilt with patience and respect, and that a life once marred by betrayal could blossom into joy and fulfillment. And yet, the story of their love was not without tension. Every moment of serenity carried the potential for challenges, the pressures of career, the responsibilities of parenting, the lingering echoes of old wounds. Lila felt the pulse of uncertainty in her chest, the nervous anticipation that often accompanies deep, transformative emotion. Could they navigate these waters without allowing fear to erode the foundation they were building? Could she surrender to the warmth of Ethan's presence, the laughter of her son, and the growing intimacy between them without hesitation or reservation? These questions hovered like quiet, unresolved notes, adding a tension that heightened rather than diminished the beauty of their unfolding relationship. The seasons changed around them, and with each passing day, Lila felt the love between her and Ethan deepen, taking root in the shared experiences of life. From quiet mornings in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, to long afternoons designing together, their connection strengthened, blending friendship, romance, and partnership into a seamless whole. Every gesture, every word, every glance became a thread in the tapestry of their bond, weaving a story of love that was patient, kind, and enduring. Lila discovered that happiness could exist not only in triumph and recognition, but in the simplicity of shared moments, the unspoken understanding of a partner who had proven himself faithful and true. And so, as they walked beneath the city lights once more, hand in hand, the world around them blurred into a soft haze of possibility. Hope, long a distant and fragile notion, now pulsed vibrantly within her chest, mingling with joy, security, and the quiet thrill of anticipation for the life they were creating together. Could this love endure the inevitable trials of life? Could they sustain the tenderness, the trust, and the intimacy that had taken root so carefully? Though uncertainty lingered like a shadow at the edges of her consciousness, for the first time in years, Lila allowed herself to believe fully in the beauty and permanence of love. Patient, protective, and undeniably theirs. Mark sat in the dimly lit office of his high-rise apartment, the city lights below flickering like distant stars, but none of them could illuminate the darkness that had settled deep within him. The champagne bottle he had cracked open hours earlier sat half empty, untouched, while his eyes remained glued to the magazine cover spread on the polished oak table. Lila's face shone with radiant confidence, her smile both serene and victorious, her eyes sparkling with the unshakable strength he had once cruelly dismissed. Beside her, Ethan's arm encircled their son, holding him with a tenderness Mark had never offered, and the sight was a cruel revelation that cut through him more sharply than any words could. Every humiliation, every betrayal he had inflicted, every cold, cutting remark he had delivered in a fit of ego-driven cruelty, now returned to him like a relentless echo, reverberating through the hollow chambers of his conscience. He had once believed that tearing her down would cement his power, that reducing her to fear, humiliation, and dependence would ensure his dominance. Yet here she was, untouchable, radiant, and unbroken. The realization struck him with the force of a tidal wave. He had wasted years of her life, of his own life, and of their son's life, by allowing his arrogance and pride to dictate his actions. He had believed that wealth, status, and control could fill the void of genuine connection, but the stark truth now pressed upon him. He had destroyed trust, fractured hearts, and obliterated the one relationship that had the potential to sustain him emotionally, spiritually, and morally. His reflection in the glass beside him seemed stranger than the woman on the cover, hollow, regretful, and painfully aware of the magnitude of his mistakes. Mark's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the magazine, tracing Lila's face with the tips of his fingers, though he did not dare touch the image fully. He remembered vividly the hospital room, the coffee hurled, the words spat like venom, the cruel laughter that had accompanied his declaration of divorce. And the image seared into his mind was no longer one of power, but of catastrophic failure. Each memory returned with brutal clarity. Her terrified eyes, the helplessness in her trembling hands, the newborn crying as though the world itself had turned against her. At the time, he had thought himself justified, rationalizing his actions as truth and justice. Now he realized that he had been nothing but a coward, a man incapable of love, respect, or empathy. He leaned back in the chair, pressing his palms against his face, trying to stifle the rising panic that threatened to overwhelm him. Could he undo the damage? Could he ever regain the trust he had so thoroughly shattered? The answer was clear in every fiber of his being, yet he could not accept it. No apology, no grand gesture, no torrent of words could repair the years he had lost, the trust he had destroyed, the confidence he had crushed. The magazine cover glared back at him like a mirror of truth, unyielding and merciless. Lila had transformed, rising above every insult and act of cruelty, and he was left with nothing but the bitter taste of his own failures. The image of Ethan holding their son stabbed him like a blade. This man, patient, kind, unwavering, had become the father figure Mark had never been capable of embodying. Watching them together, Mark felt the full weight of inadequacy, shame, and helplessness pressing down upon him. He had once imagined that the world revolved around his choices, that power and wealth could shield him from consequences, but the cruel irony was undeniable. The woman he had sought to dominate, humiliate, and control had risen above him, thriving in every dimension he had taken for granted. His pride, which had always been his shield, now felt like shackles, a constant reminder of his inability to reclaim what he had lost. Mark's mind replayed countless what-if scenarios, each one spiraling into despair. What if he had arrived earlier at the hospital? What if he had spoken with kindness instead of cruelty? What if he had shown her respect, patience, and love instead of disdain and ridicule? The answers were unbearable. It would have changed everything, but he had chosen another path, one of ego, pride, and arrogance. And now he was paying the ultimate price. Watching Lila's success, her smile, her radiant energy, and the evident bond she shared with Ethan and their son, he realized that some opportunities once lost were gone forever. No amount of regret could reconstruct the bridges he had burned. No tears could undo the humiliation he had inflicted. The pangs of regret grew sharper with every passing second. He imagined the quiet nights she must have endured, the fear and loneliness that had haunted her when she held their child and cried in solitude. He thought of the moments he had missed, the milestones he would never witness, the laughter he would never share, and the love he could never reclaim. Each thought was a blade, a cruel reminder of his irreversible failures. Could he even allow himself to grieve for what he had lost? Or was grief itself a luxury denied to those who had committed such irrevocable acts? Mark found no solace, only the relentless ache of recognition. The only woman who had truly mattered to him had been taken from his life not by fate, but by his own hands. In the quiet of his high-rise apartment, he reflected on the world outside. The celebrations, the headlines praising Lila's achievements, the admiration and respect she commanded internationally. Every headline, every accolade, every public acknowledgement was a reminder that she had transcended his cruelty, that she had transformed humiliation into triumph, and that he was nothing more than a powerless observer. Mark realized that the universe had no intention of offering him a second chance, that the life he had destroyed was now irrevocably hers to cherish and protect. And yet, despite this clarity, a part of him could not stop imagining scenarios where he might reclaim what he had lost, even though reason and reality screamed that such attempts were futile. As he stared at the magazine once more, the little boy's laugh echoing in his memory, Mark felt an unfamiliar weight pressing on his chest. It was the weight of accountability, the gravity of actions long past but eternally consequential. Could he live with himself knowing the depth of his failures? Could he forgive himself, even if no one else could? The questions circled endlessly, returning with new intensity every time he closed his eyes. Mark had always believed that wealth and power could protect him, but he now understood, with unflinching clarity, that nothing could shield him from the consequences of cruelty, pride, and betrayal. Mark rose from his chair, walking slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling window. The city sprawled beneath him, a vast landscape of lights and movement, yet it felt smaller than the immense emptiness within him. He realized he had lost not just Lila, but the life he could have shared with her, the bond he could have forged with their child, and the love he had been too blind to recognize until it was beyond his reach. Could he ever attempt to make amends, or was he destined to linger forever in the shadow of regret, powerless and haunted by the brilliance of the life he had destroyed? The weight of inevitability pressed on him like a vice, leaving no room for denial, no space for hope, only the stark reality of eternal loss. Turning away from the window, Mark felt the bitter sting of clarity. Lila's life had moved forward without him, and she was stronger, happier, and more radiant than he could have imagined. She had transformed humiliation into empowerment, despair into success, and pain into joy. Every cruel word he had spoken, every act of betrayal, had ultimately forged a woman he could no longer touch or influence. He was left alone with the knowledge that the consequences of his actions were irreversible, that his place in her story had been permanently erased, and that the man he had once believed he could control had become her past, irrelevant and powerless. Mark's last glance at the magazine lingered, a silent acknowledgement of defeat. Could he ever find redemption? Could he live knowing that he had lost the woman whose spirit, strength, and love he had so thoroughly underestimated? The answers, he realized with the piercing clarity of truth, were forever beyond his grasp. Lila had risen above him, above cruelty, above betrayal. And he could only turn away, knowing with unshakable certainty that nothing could bring back the life he had destroyed. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Lila's apartment, a mosaic of lights twinkling like scattered diamonds under the velvet night sky. She leaned against the glass, her hands clasped loosely, her son giggling at Ethan's playful antics on the plush carpet. Warmth seeped into her chest as she watched the scene unfold, the soft, unguarded laughter of a child, the steady, protective presence of a man who had become the anchor of her life, and the quiet harmony that now filled the space where chaos and pain had once reigned. Every glance, every movement, every shared laugh reminded her of how far she had come, how she had transformed despair into joy, humiliation into power, and heartbreak into a life of purpose and love. Ethan's eyes met hers across the room, a silent exchange of gratitude and recognition passing between them. He knelt beside their son, lifting him into the air, their laughter mingling in a symphony of pure happiness. Lila's heart swelled at the sight, at the realization that the little boy she had carried through pain, fear, and sleepless nights was now safe, adored, and cherished by someone who loved him unconditionally. Ethan's hand brushed against hers as he returned the boy to her arms, and a gentle whisper followed. "You're my world, and our family is complete." The words, soft yet unwavering, struck a chord deep within Lila, echoing in the chambers of her soul like a promise fulfilled. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds of laughter, city hum, and quiet breathing wash over her. Memories of past struggles surfaced, the labor room, the cruel words, the coffee hurled in contempt, yet they no longer carried the sting of humiliation. Instead, they served as markers on a journey she had traversed, a testament to her resilience, determination, and unwavering belief in herself. Every tear she had shed, every sleepless night she had endured, every battle fought to reclaim her dignity had culminated in this very moment, a life reclaimed, a family whole, and a woman standing tall in her own power. The past was no longer a weight, but a foundation upon which she had built triumph. Lila's gaze softened as she traced Ethan's features, memorizing the gentle curve of his smile, the intensity of his caring eyes, and the quiet strength he radiated. He had been with her not only through her victories, but also through her doubts, her fears, and her private moments of vulnerability. He had never demanded perfection, never overshadowed her achievements, and never questioned her worth. Instead, he had celebrated her resilience, matched her strength, and nurtured her dreams as if they were his own. In Ethan, she had found a partner who not only loved her, but amplified her, a man whose presence made her life fuller, brighter, and richer than she had dared to imagine in her darkest hours. Their son, still giggling, tugged at her hand, bringing her back to the present. Lila leaned down, holding him close, feeling his warmth, the tiny heartbeat against her chest, and the soft, trusting weight of his body in her arms. The sound of his laughter, innocent and unburdened, contrasted sharply with the echoes of pain that had once dominated her life. A reminder that she had triumphed not just for herself, but for the child she loved beyond measure. Each moment with him reinforced the knowledge that the future she had fought for was now hers, a life shaped not by fear or humiliation, but by love, courage, and relentless determination. The apartment itself mirrored the life she had created. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every carefully chosen decoration spoke of her hard work, creativity, and vision. Sketches of designs adorned the walls, evidence of her relentless pursuit of excellence and passion for fashion. Each framed award, each carefully displayed magazine feature, was a silent testament to the victories she had earned on her own terms. And yet, in the midst of tangible success, the intangible triumph was far greater, the sense of belonging, the unshakable foundation of family, and the knowledge that she had emerged from adversity stronger, wiser, and unstoppable. Even as the city pulsed below, alive with movement and sound, Lila felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The shadows of Mark's cruelty, the echoes of past humiliation, the sting of betrayal, all had faded to a distant memory. They existed no longer as forces capable of shaping her life, but as distant reminders of the resilience and strength she had cultivated. Mark's absence no longer brought sorrow. It was merely a space left empty, a contrast that highlighted the fullness of her present. She had reclaimed not only her life, but her self-respect, her identity, and her power, proving to herself that she was more than capable of building a world defined by her own terms, her own love, and her own triumphs. Ethan's hand found hers again, fingers intertwining effortlessly, a tactile reassurance that they were united not just by circumstance but by choice, by trust, and by mutual respect. Lila returned his gaze, her eyes reflecting the depth of gratitude, affection, and love she felt, a quiet acknowledgement that they had navigated life's storms together and emerged victorious. Their son's laughter continued to fill the space, a rhythm of joy and life that underscored the harmony of their little world. In that moment, Lila understood the true meaning of triumph, not just public recognition or accolades, but the quiet, profound satisfaction of knowing that she had created a life rooted in love, respect, and fulfillment. Night fell softly, painting the city in hues of indigo and gold, and Lila sat by the window, Ethan beside her, their son nestled safely between them. The cool breeze fluttered the curtains, mingling with the soft hum of the metropolis, and the scene felt like a painting of serenity and victory. Each day that had brought her struggle, humiliation, and heartbreak had been a step toward this very moment, a life defined by choice, courage, and unwavering perseverance. She allowed herself a small, contented smile, a silent acknowledgement that she had transformed pain into purpose, despair into joy, and isolation into family. Even in the quiet of the night, Lila felt her heart swell with gratitude for the journey she had endured. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every fear that had once paralyzed her now seemed trivial compared to the fullness of the life she inhabited. She reflected on the love that had blossomed between her and Ethan, the trust they had built, and the laughter of the child they both cherished. In these reflections, she found not just closure, but a profound sense of empowerment, the knowledge that she had fought, endured, and conquered. The past no longer controlled her. She controlled her narrative, her happiness, and her destiny. As the final hours of night gave way to the soft light of dawn, Lila rose, carrying her son in her arms, and watched as the city awakened below. Ethan followed, his hand on her shoulder, a reassuring presence and a steady anchor. Together, they looked out over the horizon, their hearts aligned in quiet harmony. The day ahead promised opportunities, challenges, and joys, but none of them threatened the foundation they had built. Lila knew, with unwavering certainty, that whatever came, she was ready, for herself, for her son, and for the family they had reclaimed. In that moment she whispered softly, not to anyone in particular but to the universe itself, "We are whole, we are strong, we are unstoppable." Her words were carried on the gentle morning breeze, mingling with the hum of the city and the soft laughter of the child in her arms. Every tear, every struggle, every act of courage had led to this, a life defined not by humiliation, betrayal, or despair, but by love, achievement, and unstoppable triumph. She was no longer the woman who had been broken in a labor room, powerless and humiliated. She was Lila, empowered, resilient, radiant, and fully, gloriously alive. The scene drew to a quiet, perfect stillness. Lila held her son close, Ethan's hand firm around hers, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to fully believe in the beauty of the life she had built. Every scar of the past had transformed into wisdom, every heartbreak into strength, and every humiliation into the fuel for her rise. The city below continued its restless rhythm, but inside their apartment, time seemed to pause, honoring the journey, the triumph, and the love that had made it all possible. In that moment, Lila knew with certainty she had not only survived, she had conquered. And that was Lila's journey, from humiliation and heartbreak to unstoppable strength, love, and triumph. If her story inspired you, let us know by hitting that like button, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that touches your heart. Share your thoughts in the comments. How would you have reacted if you were in her shoes? Thank you for watching Beyond Color Stories. Until next time, keep believing in the power of courage, love, and resilience.